Welcome to Stay on Track podcast with Poolson Oden Law Firm, Danny Poolson, along with my amazing co-host, Carissa Oden. Our vision is to help 500 plus families battling injuries by year 2028.
Our motto is that we help people who are hurt. Our goal is to earn each client's trust by showing up for them every day. When we say PO in our office, we think protecting others. We started this podcast to share knowledge, experience, and insights free of charge to better spread our vision and serve our communities near and far.
Today we are airing episode 7 of Stay on Track podcast with Poolson Oden Law Firm, and we're talking about railroad cancer exposure today, which we've talked about cancer in a few of our episodes, partner, and it's a more serious topic that's affected, if not all of our viewers, probably many of our viewers in some way, form, or fashion.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think everybody has dealt with it in some kind of way in their life or a loved one.
For sure. And as of recent, partner, you've seen some things which kind of put this episode sort of to the top of the list to address with railroad cancer and railroaders who may be diagnosed with cancer or have some sort of malignancy and not quite understand that it's possibly related to their time working on the railroad, right?
Right. I think that we've found at a lot of these lunch and learns that we're doing or union meetings that many of the railroaders, they don't know that could be a claim that they could have in the future, or they're retired and they're dealing with these health issues and not realizing that even though it's been years since they've worked, that this is something that could be caused by the work that they did at the railroad, or their loved ones too. Like they're bringing home certain things. Their loved ones may be dealing with cancer illnesses and they have no idea it could be related to their work at the railroad.
Yeah. So we wanted to get this episode out, and it's a little chunky, I guess, with the elements and the carcinogens and the chemicals and whatnot. So a lot of this information that we're going to be talking about today, you can find on our website, poolsonoden.com, but we're going to go through some of these specifics as far as talking with your doctor and certain chemicals and carcinogens and things like that and derailments and whatnot. So if there's anything that we're not addressing today on this episode, there's a ton of information on our website that goes through that in detail as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So for our railroaders out there, you're exposed to many dangerous chemicals and products that can actually cause cancer. And most railroaders we help do not realize, as Carissa said, the level of danger working around chemicals and products regularly. And some of the most common hazardous chemicals and products include diesel exposure and exhaust fumes, asbestos, silica, creosote and railroad ties, benzene, and Roundup. It is important to understand your exposure and if it is related to your work at the railroad. Your realization that your railroad work may have contributed or caused your illness or cancer will actually start the time and the clock to file a claim to protect your rights.
And I think that's one of the most important things we want railroaders listening today to understand, right? That the law that protects you when you have an injury, including any exposure to chemicals, it's under a law called the Federal Employers Liability Act, or FELA. Many of you probably heard that word before, but under FELA, you have 3 years to bring a claim from the date that you knew or you should have known that your cancer exposure illness was caused by your work. I think that's really important to understand, that it's when you knew or you should have known. So that could happen many years past a diagnosis of cancer if that's something that you've never connected the dots to. But once that starts, your time starts to move and tick. So what that means, what's important for you to know, is to call and speak with us here at Poolson Oden Law Firm as soon as you suspect that you or your loved one were exposed to chemicals or products at the railroad that were a cause of you or your loved one's cancer or illness. It's important to talk to us so that we can figure out that time for you to bring a claim, and if you have a claim that's still able to be brought under the law.
Partner, let me ask this question. For someone who is for someone who has not been diagnosed with cancer yet, and no doctor has said you have cancer yet, obviously the clock, that 3-year period, would not begin running until the date of diagnosis of cancer?
Right. That's what. Yes, we argue that you wouldn't know about cancer until you're diagnosed with cancer, right?
Right.
So once you have that diagnosis, if your doctor discusses with you, and sometimes they don't, right? That might not be something that comes up, but if they do discuss with your exposures to different chemicals or products and you talk about your work, then that knowledge under the law is when the law says, okay, well, right? You need to do something about this within 3 years if you're going to bring a claim.
So the first date of diagnosis, and I think when you say the time period, and we want to make sure we're clear on that for the folks who don't know, that to me is kind of one of the triggers. Is I think, okay, what if I actually have cancer right now? How far back? If I knew, if I didn't know, at a minimum, we want to know the date of diagnosis. And if you get diagnosed, God forbid you don't, but if you do, at a minimum from that date, you need to be proactive about what may have caused the cancer, because then the railroad is actually going to argue that 3-year period has lapsed and the claim goes away forever and you can't revive it.
Exactly. They're going to be looking through and seeing when your first bit of knowledge is. And for cancer, like diagnosis for an illness, it may be a little bit more complicated, right? If it's not cancer and you have some kind of pulmonary illness, COPD, maybe you've been in with shortness of breath and you've talked to your doctor about it being related to work, and he's given you a diagnosis and you continue to have that treatment, right? Railroad's going to comb through that and go, okay, well, you were short of breath here. We want the claim to be gone, right? So it's important that if you have some knowledge, a lot of the railroaders at the union meetings too, the union brings to their attention certain things that could be connected to their exposures at work. When you have that knowledge, it's important for you to call and talk to us about what you're going through so that we can protect your rights, right? That's protecting others. That's what we're trying to do. We want to protect that right that you may have to bring that claim.
No, that's such a great point. And I think we're talking about two things. One is you actually, as someone who has worked for the railroad, for the carrier, and has been diagnosed with cancer, you actually have rights you may not know about. Mm-hmm. And the railroad actually is very sophisticated, knows about those rights, hopes you sit on it for that 3-year period. And that time period could be running and you don't even know it. And the railroad's going to say you knew the time period was running, and then your rights go away. So one, you have rights you may not know about, and two, the rights you didn't know about, actually the railroad's going to argue are gone after the 3-year period.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, they definitely keep track of that. If they have your medical records, or they're gonna make sure that they're like hoping and praying, like get to that 3 years and don't have anything filed. That's the first thing they're going to argue, that it's gone.
Right. Okay. So, partner, going to the chemicals and products, starting with diesel exhaust. What is diesel exhaust, and how is that hazardous to railroaders?
It's a great question, and one that we get a lot from railroaders. It's diesel exhaust and asbestos are two of the main hazards that railroaders are exposed to in their work. So, virtually all railroad crafts endure chronic exposure to diesel exhaust. So, in any craft that you're working, and I think when we talk to railroaders, they'll attest to this. They are constantly, breathing in diesel exhaust, diesel fumes. They're working, fueling trains. I mean, it's a big part of what they do every day. So, and diesel exhaust is known to cause lung cancer and can cause a variety of respiratory conditions such as asthma and COPD. It's been associated with bladder cancer, kidney cancer, colon cancer, throat cancer, and stomach cancer. And this is one that has been labeled as a carcinogen, right? There's no doubt that diesel exhaust causes cancer. And I think it's important, again, no matter what your craft, all railroad employees have been exposed to diesel exhaust. At least since 1955, in documents that we've gathered and cases that we've worked for cancer victims, railroads were aware that diesel exhaust was dangerous to their employees. And even with this knowledge, the carriers didn't take any actions to protect any employees or warn them for decades, which is crazy, I think, to me. I mean, that they've known for an extensive amount of time that this is a problem, and they didn't do anything to help protect employees.
When I started working on these types of cases in the maritime industry with asbestos being used as viscosifiers and uncovering these documents that these companies knew about the illnesses that could come from the exposure to these products, and they continued to manufacture the products based on a financial planning setup to make money. It really still, as I talk about it right now, it sends shivers down my spine, because it's something that you think you only see on TV, or it's only a conspiracy theorist talking about it. And the reality is it's we've seen in the railroad industry and in the maritime industry that these companies know what they're manufacturing is bad for you and your family, and they sold it anyway.
Right. And when you say shivers, yeah, it's the fact that they put this in writing, right? Like, we have the documents where they've discussed this at large meetings, and they're weighing whether you're going to know, right? So, no specific, the railroad, they had their doctors come in. They're talking about, they've seen a connection here, but they're weighing whether it's better for them to do anything about it now, which they decided, they weren't going to do anything. And then hopefully you don't know down the road. And, it may those claims just go away. Like, let's just keep it to ourselves, and you may never know. And we're making a business decision here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's eerie when you think about the value of life and how precious it is, and then for executives and decision makers to put the value of business and money and profits over people. It's I'm at a loss for words to think about it. And again, that's why we wanted to put this episode together and get it out there as soon as possible, because it's sometimes, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, partner, but the companies or the carriers want the railroaders and the workers and the general public to be ignorant to what they know to be true, and not know about for the railroaders, their rights and their protections, because it actually benefits the carrier and the railroads.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. That's absolutely true. And that's, I think that's part of what we want to do today on the podcast, like, talking about the asbestos, letting railroaders know, like, how are railroaders exposed to asbestos? We just talked about the diesel, so they have a good idea, like, oh, okay, I did work in the shops, or I did do that with engines. Okay, that exposure, it's even more, giving that knowledge, so you're not ignorant to the things that you were exposed to and what problems those cause, because the railroad for years was not required to even put placards or anything to say this is hazardous.
Right.
And then even after they were required, they still don't do it. As recent as 2015, several of the carriers were cited because they didn't have things that said diesel exhaust is a carcinogen, right? They're not giving that knowledge. So that's kind of what we're here today to do.
No, for sure. So asbestos is also a main concern for railroaders, partner? Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so let's talk a little bit about how the railroaders were exposed to asbestos.
Yeah, so unfortunately for railroaders, the carriers have been relying on products manufactured with asbestos for years. And the railroad has known since 1958 that asbestos causes cancer. And again, helpful to know what asbestos is. We have a ton of information on our website, but a little bit about asbestos, to get a little technical here. It's a heat-resistant fibrous silicate mineral that has been used in many products and materials such as sheetrock, bricks, brake linings, brake pumps, and concrete. Asbestos has been used historically in insulation, roof shingles, and siding. Asbestos was also found in brake pads and drilling mud. And when I talked earlier about this as a viscosifier, it was used because of its heat. We mentioned that it's heat resistant, and the way that it affects the body, essentially, and we're not doctors or scientists, but what we understand to be true is the way that the body doesn't absorb it. It's unabsorbable. The body can't process it. And we have a visual on our website with a penny, and the penny, the size of a penny, and then it's got 5 or 6 fiber hairs, and it shows how little. And then it's got 2 to 3 grains of rice, and then itty bitty bitty. It's much smaller than 3 grains of rice. It's 20,000 asbestos fibers.
It's crazy how small, right?
Exactly. So small. And so in the railroad industry, there are several ways that railroaders are exposed to asbestos. Asbestos containing brake shoes, asbestos containing gaskets, seals, and rope, asbestos containing locomotive rail and car parts, asbestos lined pipes in the heating systems of the locomotives, and asbestos in the buildings and locomotive shops where railroaders worked. And so knowing that it's a known carcinogen, the only safe level to asbestos is 0, because even small doses of exposure can result in cancer and mesothelioma. Mm-hmm. And so with all the asbestos used by the railroad in these products, partner, what are additional potential risks to the health of workers and railroaders exposed to asbestos?
I think you mentioned one just a moment ago. So asbestos is known to cause mesothelioma and lung cancer. It's also associated with cancers such as throat cancer, kidney cancer, and other pulmonary conditions such as asbestosis. So on our website, we have a large section about what mesothelioma is. I think a lot of people have heard that word, right? You see some of those commercials on TV about talking about it, but it's essentially a tissue tumor of the lungs, stomach, heart, or other organs. And it's the most common form of cancer that affects the lungs. This exposure and inhalation of asbestos fibers can cause mesothelioma. So, and treatment for that, can surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. I mean, it's if you're diagnosed with mesothelioma, right? Like it's a serious condition. And I know that, again, part of why we're here talking about this on the podcast is so that you know that, you have an advocate with us and a resource, right? Like if that's something that you're dealing with, we want to be here for you and help you go through that. Cause I mean, I don't know about you, partner, but we've had clients with this condition, and it's just it's a lot to deal with.
For sure, and I've got a note here that asbestos also causes cancer of the larynx and ovaries. Mm-hmm. And I know for me we've talked about my dad and my dad being working in the oil field and being exposed to things, and he passed away from bladder cancer, and our family talks about that often, what the cause of that was. And when he passed, I didn't have the knowledge then, being in law school, that I have now with the experience helping people who have been unfortunately diagnosed with cancer. And so, for us, it's very important to understand the why, and and know why this has happened. And sometimes it's hereditary, right? Cancer can be hereditary. At the same breath, though, to know that there's exposure out there to bad things, for us it's a why, and it's one of those things that we take very personally and very seriously, because we've had to deal with that in our own personal lives. So it's just understanding the why and making sure that let's go get better, but while we're getting better, let's make sure if somebody knew that this was going to cause you harm, we protect you, and not just you, we protect your families. Losing a father, 3 younger sisters, a mom who's a widow, when you see that, mm-hmm. it changes you, right? It does. When you go through trauma, it changes you. And for us, when we talk about legacy, this is something that's really on my heart, is that you're leaving behind your spouse, you're leaving behind your kids, you're leaving behind your grandchildren. This is something that, we've had a lot of clients share that with us, that they go, look, I may not be able to even finish this fight, but I want this for my family, and I want my family to be protected. So it's just one of those things that's near and dear to our heart, because mm-hmm. We've been there, we've seen it, and we've dealt with it. And so it's almost, not knowing all the things my dad was exposed to, it's kind of like, right or wrong, I kind of feel, I feel like it's part of my calling. It's part of what we do here to figure out the why, and then protect those workers that provide for the families, and then protect those workers' families.
No, I think that, the way you said it, partner, I think is exactly right. I mean, and when we talk about the loved ones too, I think what's important to know, especially with asbestos, and I know you can talk to this, the families themselves, like the workers unknowingly are bringing home things, right? So maybe, talking about that a little bit, like you may be dealing with pulmonary issues, or like I know, cause shortness of breath, tightness in your chest, a bunch of different illnesses, and not even realize that maybe unknowingly your spouse or your brother, or whoever working in the home with you, was bringing that to you.
And what's scary about when we start talking about this, where my head goes with products is making money and capitalism, right? And the reality is that these companies are built to make money, and asbestos is essentially microscopic. And when you see it, it's a white material, and so you may not even see it on your clothes, in your jeans, on your Dickies. You don't see it. And so if you go home, especially for these maritime workers, I know they would go home covered in this white powder, and their spouse would wash the clothes. There's asbestos now floating all inside of that house. And if they have central air and heat, there's asbestos floating around in that HVAC system. Right. And we've seen spouses with a diagnosis that's attributable to asbestos going, how is this even possible? It's from the secondhand exposure from washing clothes that have the asbestos fibers on them for money.
For money, right. Right.
And again, I certainly don't want to go down a diatribe road of ranting and raving, but I have a visceral response to that, because it's the balance of profits over people, basically. And I don't mean to oversimplify it like that, but that's unfortunately, with the work we've done and the things we've seen, there's no other conclusion you can arrive at other than profits over people. And we tell the juries that.
No, I mean, and I think it's a really good point that secondhand exposure is a real thing, even for the railroaders. Even when the airlines got away with smoking on planes, right? Amtrak decided to cater to that, and they continue to allow secondhand smoke, or continue to allow people to smoke on the trains. All of those workers having to work in that environment, there's claims for them because of that, and Amtrak just recently did away with that. So yeah, that is a real thing. The secondhand smoke, the secondhand exposure to the asbestos. You're absolutely right. We're here to make sure that as a railroad or maritime worker, what you've been exposed to, but also what potentially your family has been exposed to, right? And we're here to protect both, but you have to have that knowledge.
For sure. No, partner, that's a really, really good point. And when we're talking about being exposed to chemicals and products, we mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast. Let's talk to our listeners about what hazardous chemicals are transported by rail.
And I think that, even if you're not a railroad worker, there's railroads that go through the communities, right? So it's good to know, what potentially are in those cars. Railroads transport chemicals in the form of fertilizers to farmers, plastic resins to auto part producers, caustic soda to pulp and paper manufacturers, and countless other chemical products throughout the U.S. Freight railroads move 2.3 million carloads of plastics, fertilizers, and other chemicals in 2022. So it kind of gives you a good idea of they are the main source of moving these type of products all over the country.
That's a lot of carloads. 2.3 million carloads. Why are chemicals transported by rail?
Well, the Federal Railroad Administration, who is the body that looks at the safety of what the railroads are doing, right? They're the ones that kind of police that. They recognize it, and I'm put this in air quotes, as the safest land-based method to moving large quantities of chemicals over long distances. I put that, we put that kind of in air quotes because the carriers continue to increase the lengths of the trains and continue to try to cut the crews, right? So the safety of transporting is compromised because of this, right? So it may be, or could have been, right, the safest way to transport these chemicals when the train lengths weren't miles and miles long and they've got one person trying to maneuver those trains through our communities, right? We've seen this with recent derailments. I think most of our listeners have probably heard about the East Palestine, Ohio derailment, and there's been several others in recent years that have jeopardized community safety when a variety of all these hazardous chemicals were spilled right there. in separate cars for a reason. Probably not supposed to be mixed together. I mean, they're hazardous by themselves, and then, they can be flammable. I mean, there's a lot of people that we're dealing with having to evacuate their homes, and then the railroaders themselves exposed, and the risk of the whole train exploding, right? Because we've got all these chemicals moving through communities, and the railroaders decided that it's better for them to have one person handling these trains. There's no regulations on the length right now. I know the FRA is working on that, but yeah, it's very, very kind of scary to think about what's going, sometimes past our schools. I think you and your kids, where they play, right? The playground that they go to a lot for their sports, there's trains that go right next to them. Right?
Yeah, and our railroaders out there, UP, BNSF, y'all are pulling that horn while we're practicing at Pond and Playground, and we're looking at you. And I got my hand fist pumping, giving you a shout out for sure. I appreciate y'all, but that's exactly what I wanted to touch on is the train length, and we crossings and this, that, and the other. And my point of that is train lengths have become for folks who don't know, train lengths have gotten longer, which means they're heavier, which means there's more risk involved with slack action and things like that, but they're still carrying the same products, and that creates a larger risk for derailments, which endangers the community. And the carriers are trying to decrease the workforce to essentially a one-person crew to manage a train that could be miles long and tons heavy down our streets, across our communities, near and far. And is that the PSR, the precision scheduled railroading that they're trying to roll out? And when you think about that, all while carrying hazardous materials.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, no, you said all that perfect. And the railroaders themselves, and recently there was a win for them with the FRA because they mandated for freight that they have 2 crew. But I'll tell you, when I first started doing this, partner, like the crews were 6 people, right? And even at that time,
I don't mean to interrupt, Chris, but that was a long Chris, was that a long when you started helping railroaders a long time ago?
Was it that long ago? But
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I had to
pick on me.
I'm needling a little bit. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just that even then, railroaders talked about, needing more crew, right? So to think that it's a win for 2, it is, but because it's not 1, right? But it's a lot to put on their shoulders. And especially without, like you talked about, the regulation on the length, the more cars, the more product, the railroads move into more customers, and they can do it, with just 1 train, right? That all profit, all production. And the safety isn't a priority. And we've seen that. It's come to fruition. There's a great documentary on HBO, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it talks about this whole idea of the train links and going through neighborhoods and essentially transporting bombs, right? Like they are transporting chemicals that could be made into bombs if they derail, if they mix, right? It's scary. It's scary for the workers, scary for the communities.
Scary stuff.
Yeah. We were talking about the chemicals being transported by rail, partner. And so after a railroader inhales chemicals, how long does it take to recover?
We get this question a lot, and it's a really good question, and it depends on the type of chemical and the duration of the exposure. For example, one of the most common ways workers are exposed to chemicals is through pesticide use. Railroads use those chemicals to control vegetation growing on mainline tracks, in the rail yards, or at railroad crossings. Using pesticides instead of other pest and weed control is actually cheaper for the railroads. These pesticides are inhaled by railroaders, and long-term exposure leads to railroaders developing potential fatal illnesses. And also on our website, we have an explanation of benzene, which is another chemical known to be present in the railroad environment. Partner, you want to tell us a little bit about what what benzene is and teach us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think a lot of railroaders, that they're familiar with diesel exhaust, diesel fumes. I think they've probably heard benzene, but it's a colorless, and it's like a light yellow liquid chemical that's highly flammable, and it evaporates really quickly. So it's formed from natural processes such as volcanoes and forest fires, but exposure to benzene results from human activity. So it's one of the most widely used chemicals in the U.S. It's primarily used as a starting material in other chemicals, including plastics, lubricants, rubbers, dyes, detergents, drugs, and pesticides. So like diesel exhaust, it is a known carcinogen, meaning it is a chemical that's known by the railroad for causing cancer. And partner, maybe we talk a little bit about how are railroaders primarily exposed to benzene in the workplace?
The primary way people are exposed to benzene is by breathing air containing benzene. Benzene is also a natural part of crude oil, gasoline, and therefore motor vehicle exhaust and cigarette smoke. It can manifest as exhaust from vehicles, industrial emissions, or vapors from different paints. Benzene is known to affect railroad workers because of its close proximity to the train's diesel fumes. Chemical is also known to cause cancer and other illnesses such as diminished immune system, anemia, and cancers such as leukemia. Benzene is also known to be harmful to reproductive organs. Benzene can also be absorbed through the skin during contact with a source such as gasoline, but because liquid benzene evaporates quickly, this is less common. Benzene in any quantity is dangerous, but railroad workers can be exposed to exceptionally high levels. And with all of that, benzene is bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if I'm a railroader, it's been years since my exposure or my loved one's exposure, partner, how do you prove exposure to these hazardous chemicals and products?
I think that's a really good question, one that we get calls about, because I think some railroaders or their loved ones, they go, oh man, well, I haven't worked at the railroad. I've been retired for 10 years. Like, I don't have a claim anymore, right? That's all gone. And so I think it most important, like, call us, right? Talk to us about that. But it's important that you know what chemicals and products you're exposed to. And you may say, well, Carissa, I worked there. I changed out brake shoes. I did this work. I worked with the locomotives. Great. Like, call us and talk to us about your work history, right? Because at Poolson Oden, we've gathered a bunch of documents and materials that show that the railroad, again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, that they've known about the hazards caused by these chemical and products for years, right? These are complicated cases because we've got to put together what you were doing at the railroad, what you were exposed to, and we specialize in those cases, right? We are your designated lawyers for proving your railroad cancer case. So it's important to call us, let us walk through your work history, right? What you did, so that we can connect those dots.
Partner, when you're talking about these cases being complicated and having designated lawyers, I think it's important to note, and this is for the viewers, is kind of me bragging on Chris a little bit, with Chris's appointment as designated legal counsel for SMART, but our firm being designated by TCU IAM, and then our Chris is also on the board of ARLA, the Academy of Rail Labor Attorneys, which I think is really cool because it takes a lot of effort, but we're pushing the protection of the FALA and FRSA and make sure your rights are there. I think the point of all that is that when you're out there looking for a lawyer to handle your case and back you up, you want to make sure that lawyer is qualified, and in this instance, I would say designated, because you want to know that they've got the experience handling those types of cases. They're familiar with those sorts of things, because it's like anything else. There's a lot of lawyers out there.
Right.
Not to be disparaging of other lawyers, but this is its own specialty, and a jack of all trades is a master of none. If you don't have a designated attorney, and not just our firm, right? It's anyone you hire. I'm not suggesting you hire us. I'm suggesting you hire somebody who's competent and qualified and designated to handle your situation, because it is specialized.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important that you have someone that knows those time frames, right? Knows what dots need to be connected, has those documents. I mean, I can't imagine someone that is just, has not worked in these kind of cases. The railroad's very good about hiding things, right? They're going to say they have no documents. How many times have we asked for things in cases where we know that it exists? We know because we've gathered over the years, and they still say they don't have those things, right? You want to have someone that can really dive in and they know what they're looking for to go get those pieces that the railroad is they've been keeping them. Right.
For sure. And the other thing, and again, it's on my heart, and I'm very passionate about this, is we pride ourselves on providing exceptional service in the legal industry. And I think even if you have a competent lawyer, you need to have a lawyer that's resilient and relentless and tenacious to pursue this, because these carriers are billion-dollar companies. And you've got to have attorneys who are ready to work and, like Krista said, dig into what's going on to get you the best result and make sure that attorney's leaving no stone unturned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the railroad has, they have very sophisticated legal departments. I mean, they have a whole separate group that's just working on making sure that you don't get any money and that the law is favorable to them, right? So they work. It's like a dual track for them. So you need someone that understands that and knows that first answer of we don't have it, or we can't find it, or we don't know where it is BS, right? And that the only way we're going to get the pieces is by continuing to push and use, hopefully, the court system to help with that at times, right?
For sure, and that spreads across all industries. I mean, we've seen there's best practices in insurance company claims, in railroad from decision makings, from maritime companies from decision makers that are literally looking at the best way to avoid taking responsibility for decisions they made previously. I mean, it's scary, and so you want to make sure you've got a competent attorney who's also is courageous and will hustle to figure it out to get you the result. Because unfortunately, in our practice, we see that sometimes that maybe. Well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of, like you said at the beginning, when we think of PO at the office, we think of protecting others, right? Like, we've made it our business to serve all individuals that are being hurt by these type of business practices, right? Railroaders, maritime workers, those of you that are dealing with insurance issues with your property, anyone that has been injured, right? That's our mission, is to help families battling injuries. So that's what we're here to do.
So, partner, talking about regulated chemicals, what are employers responsible to do if you work with regulated chemicals?
Well, specifically for the railroad, the law says that they're required to provide railroaders with a safe place to work, right? They can't get rid of that responsibility. So when railroaders are working with hazardous chemicals and products, the federal law requires that the railroad provides a safe working environment. So again, here at Poolson, we specialize in railroad cases and helping railroaders who are victims of exposures at the railroad build your case, right, against the railroad who had a duty to protect you or your loved one. So, that's a really good question. Part of our job is to make sure that we put those pieces together to show that they did not provide a safe place to work, right? They knew that the chemicals, and we have the documents, they know that chemicals and products have been dangerous since the 50s, right? Sometimes before then. So it's our job to put those pieces together, but they're required to provide that safe working environment. And they can't look to, the asbestos manufacturer or some other folks that say, oh, well, they gave us the product. No, you used it. You had your railroaders use it. You knew about it. You're responsible for it.
And you bring up such a good point. I just can't help but say this out loud again. Railroaders do not have workers' comp.
Well, yeah.
This is a unique thing that is not surprisingly common. It's not common. It's not commonly known by the public, and we've run into railroaders who don't realize that. Railroaders do not have workers' comp. The FALA allows them to proceed against the carrier, and people think, well, I don't want to go against my company or whatnot, but the carrier who has the knowledge, who has the experience, is responsible for providing a safe work environment, and you don't have comp. I just cannot express that enough. You do not have workers' comp. It is a zero-sum game, which, again, sends shivers down my spine sometimes. But that is the system that exists, that we didn't create, that we work within to protect. And so if you don't have that tenacious lawyer who's competent, who's willing to go that extra distance for you, willing to take that risk with you, willing to lean into the case with you, your case is a zero-sum game risk for you and your family because there's no workers' comp.
No, I think it's an excellent point that we probably should repeat every time we're on the podcast because, and what's scary and sad is that, and I think this kind of illustrates the length that the carriers will go to misinform, is that how many railroads do we have that call and go, well, the claims department said I'm comp, right? They put that on my forms. They told me I have workers' comp. It's just a little different. They don't tell them anything about their time frames, their rights, none of that. So it's misleading. And then, again, I think your point's excellent. A lot of our railroaders say, well, I have workers' comp, right? Everyone knows that workers have comp.
And I think this is worth noting too. I mean, we've seen this. We've seen a carrier drag out a claim with our client. He wasn't our client yet for 3 years. Mm-hmm. When the 3-year mark told, when he called back to check in, no answer. Mm-hmm. No answer. Had to keep scrambling around to find someone to talk to. Finally got on the phone with somebody at the carrier's office somewhere, and that person informed him that the 3 years has lapsed, and he is, how do you say, SOL?
SOL.
SOL. And for those who don't know it, I'm not going to say that, but he's out of luck. Mm-hmm. He's out of luck. And so we had to wrestle with that case, and his claim was prescribed, and the carrier, I hate to say led him on, but they kept the communications open for 3 years, and then after 3 years, they said, you don't have a claim anymore. Mm-hmm. It's gone. That happened.
Yep.
Scary. So I think at the end of the day, when we talk about what we do, we talk about humble service, lawyers who serve. That is what we do. And so I think for us being resources for railroaders, we're here for you, for whatever questions you may have. And I also, again, this is another thing that I think is important. I think sometimes, partner, maybe you talk about this a little bit. I think sometimes when, especially as men, asking for help or asking a question can be taken as a sign of weakness, but the reality is a sign of strength, and it's courageous because people who ask for help will then figure things out and then actually make better decisions because they'll have more information at the time that they need to make the decision.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, just ask us the question. We say here a lot, that this is a safe place, right? That you can call and ask us anything that's on your heart and on your mind, and especially with what we're talking about today, partner, with cancer. I mean, you're dealing with so much as it is, right? I mean, and that doesn't need to be an added stressor to you. Let us take that from you and help you figure that out, and then give you our best advice on how to move forward, right? And so I think it's a great point. Just call, right? Just ask the questions. Part of our job is to tell you good, bad, and ugly, right? So we're going to give you the right, we're not going to walk you down a road without letting you know why we're going to walk down that road with you. And so it's good to just to ask the questions. And if you don't want to call, have your wife call, right? Have your sister call, or, if you're worried about it,
or
have a friend call.
Or if you're younger, send the text to do the live chat, right? We're trying to get rid of any hurdles or friction to get to us. Because at the end of the day, I think what is surprising and especially with veterans, we see this a lot where people don't want to ask for help or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then we'll say, just turn the chessboard around. What would you do if somebody asked you for help? Mm-hmm. And you see the response I do whatever they need. I go do this. I'll figure it out, whatever. And then so turn the chessboard back around. Well, why can't you ask the question? And so it kind of gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because I don't know if it's a male thing, kind of hard-headed, ask the question. But I think saying I need help, let me go figure it out, that's okay. And it is
brave.
It is.
Yes,
and it's confidential.
Yes.
There's no obligation, right?
No.
It's for us, service means a lot to us. And so we enjoy figuring things out. We enjoy creative problem solving, and we enjoy meeting people and knowing people. I mean, that's why we do what we do. And so for us, it's literally being a resource for a railroader. You're not putting us out. It's what we do. We serve. And that includes answering questions, right?
Of course. Yeah. And I think what we say often is we want to be, we're your lawyers for you and your family on and off the track, right? So if it's something that you need, don't hesitate to call. If we can't help you, we're going to find somebody that can, right?
No, that's a great way to put it, partner. So for us here at PO, that does it for episode 7 of Stay on Track podcast. Our vision is to help 500 families battling injuries and legal disputes by year 2028.
Our motto is that we help people who are hurt. Our goal is to earn each client's trust by showing up for them every day. When we say PO in our office, we think protecting others. We started this podcast to share knowledge, experience, and insights free of charge to better spread our vision and serve our communities near and far.
And for everyone listening in, thank you very much. Tell us something good. Please like us and share our vision on Facebook and social media so others may learn more about what we do and who we help. For Carissa, I'm Danny. Thank you for staying on track with Poolson Oden Law Firm.
Thank you.